Okay. You can begin.
You will discover some of my most challenging questions in this presentation. Challenges as a native and scientist about the Book of Mormon that I've had for years. My faith has been tested. How some elements of the Book of Mormon migration stories just did not track. You will hear why I tore up the book as a teenager, and how my own Choctaw migration story might be what I call a PC, or a possible connection to the book. I will touch only on the introduction to just some of the native traditions in the book and other scriptures. You will discover a kind of a fun PC to why the Jaredites' vessels had a hole in the top and bottom, and maybe how they were able to survive for 344 days in those little barges, and to how some native teachings may have a PC to quantum physics. We'll have a preview of a fascinating discovery about Jacob's parable of the olive tree and ancient olive horticulture that I learned when I was teaching botany at Graceland. So this is just one native perspective. I cannot represent only myself, not any other tribes. I recall when another native wanted to, and he was faced with a similar position that I am this evening. This group of folks he was addressing did not know him. And this group was just as diverse and scattered and articulate and knowledgeable, just like you folks are. He decided to ask a bunch of questions, matter of fact, about 52, hoping that he could offer that group something valuable and important. This is found in the 3rd chapter of Alma. I've decided to use his technique of teaching. Right now, I only have 49 questions, some easily answered during my journey with the book, and some very serious questions that have been in my mystery bag for years. My twin brother likes to use the mystery bag, so I borrowed that from him. I'm going to call this mysteries and discoveries. I've suffered the same dilemma that every presenter has suffered from. What do I leave out? Tonight, write down the number of any of the numbered questions and mention that that you might want additional information, or questions that have occurred to you, and send them to Paul, our narrator. I can send to you by jump drive more complete studies in my library, and this is my address that you can send it to. I do want to make a quick disclaimer. This material is subjective and not verifiable facts and based upon oral traditions. It is influenced by the teller, is based upon my own personal experiences, and have no variable timeline. I know you are very experienced at this presentation and this material research. Only a PC, that means possible connection to possible native nations. How could just, like one Black person or one Mexican or one American say, this is how we feel and believe? So all I can do is to share with what I believe and what I feel. As a newcomer to this unusual and varied group, I do not know what has already been covered in depth and detail. Forgive me if some of my discoveries are old stuff to you. The introductory mystery will be first attributed to be the discovery on the Isleta reservation near Los Lunas in New Mexico. This is just south of Albuquerque, and how it might be a PC to the book. Next then is why I tore up the book. So hang on to your hats, because in this Zoom, we're going to lay rubber. We knew that the mountains south of Albuquerque, New Mexico, on the Isleta Indian reservations, were some writings east of a town of Los Lunas. We followed a map into the mountains and a fence line. That's my scout there by the fence line. And we followed that fence line down to where we thought, and I got to figure out why I'm not advancing. Okay, into a rock valley. We could not find the writings, then we saw them. Can you spot them? Look closer at the bottom. And there we found these writings. The writings were known by the Smithsonian Institute in 1896, but no one could read them. Here we are next to the rock. A fellow by the name of Dr. James Taylor, a Hebrew expert at a conference in North Carolina, put a picture up and said, I took this, I can't read the writings. Someone in the back said, I can. It is the square-shaped Hebrew, symbols of Hebrew used around 600 BCC, and together they translated and discovered it was the 10 Commandments. And there's the drawings and so forth they made, and it's called Hebrew, or Paleo-Hebrew, and the 10 Commandments, and that was used apparently before 600 BC. Here we have a close-up of the square-shaped carvings, rock carvings, and comparing them to the King James Version and also the Book of Mormon found in Mosiah. And so in Hebrew, it says, there be God other before my face. Of course, in Hebrew, this backwards. The next one, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And then take not, idol shall you make not. And there's the translation in the King James Version and the Book of Mormon. Remember in vain, Jehovah name. There's the translation. To keep holy the Sabbath. And your mother, your father, honor. Not, you must murder not. Not commit adultery. You must not steal, not false witness against neighbor, give something there as testimony for your neighbor and so forth. It's interesting to see and discover this. So we ask the question, did the Book of Mormon leaders have the 10 Commandments written in the ancient square-shaped Hebrew? As a scientist, here's some things that just didn't track in the book. The travels from Jerusalem to the Red Sea back and forth was a matter of days when they did that. And then I discovered something about the geology of the Jerusalem area. And why would it take 8 years to travel eastward to an ocean, a short distance? And why did the family Lehi have to live on raw meat in certain parts of their travels? There are two possible routes that I'm sure that you have covered in your presentations previous. They could go south and then a short distance to the east, or go a short distance south from Jerusalem and then a great distance to the east. This is a relief map of Jordan, and Lydia, and Iraq and Saudi Arabia as a surrounding area as it is today. On examining a map of the area, we see that to leave Jerusalem, one must travel south to the Salt Sea, commonly known as the Dead Sea. You got to get around that. The direct distance from Jerusalem to the Red Sea today is approximately 150, 160 miles. Both the Gulf of Suez and Gulf of Aqaba are considered at that time to be the Red Sea. That's Exodus, you can look that up. The Gulf may have extended much farther north toward the Salt Sea than we see it at the present time. A satellite photo confirms the presence of a Great Depression which exists between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba that might make the Red Sea closer to Jerusalem. in that day. So here's that relief map. There's that gouge or that depression. And up here is the Salt Sea at the top. And of course, the record says 3 days going south in the wilderness by the borders of the Red Sea. There's your depression. And there's the Red Sea down there. A recent discoveries about the land around the area in the Persian Gulf. It was made, a discovery was made around that area, Jerusalem and the Persian Gulf, that the land is rising. That means if you go back into time, the Red Sea would have flowed up the depression and closer to Jerusalem. Interesting thought, isn't it? There's a source. And so I've made a little blue mark there to show that that could have flowed up that depression. And now maybe this scientist might say, well, okay, it's possible. Go back and forth in 3 days. It's also been discovered that the land around the Persian Gulf has been dropping several inches every year. This means that a few thousand years ago, the Persian Gulf was very small and shallow and was not even connected to the ocean, the Indian Ocean. Thus, the Persian Gulf eastward from Jordan would have been very easy to go across and could have created many waters back in those days. And that record shows and tells about them having to go through many waters. This historian, Flavius Josephus, in a certain book and chapter says that it is known that the Persian Gulf, the sea that the Tigris and Euphrates flowed into, was also known as what? The Red Sea. Thus the Gulf of Suez and Gulf of Queba and the Persian Gulf surrounding land known as the Arabian Peninsula was now collectively as the Red Sea. So in the record, when they talked about traveling along the shores of the Red Sea, that's another mystery. It was, what was the land like is what we're talking about. Beheld the sea, which they called Iridium. Fortunately, they gave this definition, the recorder did, as being interpreted many waters. And if you studied the land going south, it's desert. And so there's not many waters, so that didn't track. But then it also mentions that 8 years in the wilderness and conditions described leading us to the conclusion that their eastward travel took them not to the coast of Arabia, but to perhaps the Far East, maybe to the coast of the Pacific Ocean waters. So note, I have made the Persian Gulf here into many waters because it was higher in those days there, you see. So if they did travel a short distance from Jerusalem and then across the other way, it might explain something else that's in the record. Why did it take 8 years to travel? And maybe it's because they had to travel across Asia. And why did the family of Lehi have to live on raw meat in a certain part of their travels? Maybe they would be traveling close to civilizations and could not risk building what? To cook a fire. Well, that's just another PC. Why did I tear up the Book of Mormon as a teenager? Well, in the work world as a teenager, the other kids had their paperback books. I didn't have a paperback book. They would read it during their break times. The only paperback book that I had was something called the Book of Mormon, but it was so big it didn't fit. So I would take First Nephi, tear it out, put that in my pocket, and that's what I would read during break times. As a teenager, reading that, I was changed. These, I felt and knew they were real people with real adventures and with a real story. So that just began my search of that book. Another part that didn't quite track in the book, as scientists, I guess maybe I'm a tendency to find these things. Why would steel bows break or lose their spring? Oh, you're supposed to say, yeah, that's what my students are. When they come across something like this, well, as a scientist, I knew high temperatures on tempered steel would distemper spring steel. If it's vibrated while it's hot, it will lose its spring. They may have laid their bows on hot sand in a desert and then shot arrows while hot. And steel arrows produce a great deal of vibration and could also slowly distemper. Well, this is a PC. So there's a little slide. Faye Shaw does an excellent job of making slides like this. I appreciate her artwork there. So they also made their own arrows to match their bow. And that was kind of an interesting PC, because when I made wooden bows, the position of the handle was not always in the center because the wood was more flexible at one end than the other. And arrows, wood arrows, bend around the bow. So they must match the power of the bow. More power for the bow, the stiffer the arrow, otherwise the arrow would veer off to the right or left of the target. And so here's one of my bows and a bunch of arrows, every one of them different sizes and different styles of feathers. And the design, of these arrows must match the bow. So when Nephi made a wooden bow, he also had to make the arrows to fit. Why a hole in the top of the vessels of these folks that came across the ocean? Only a scientist would let this nag them. Even today, how could you have enough food to feed even 10 or 20 people per barge, to bathe, to take care of their health needs, and to get fresh water for 344 days? Here's what we discovered while we were in Hawaii. The island people built canoes with walls or tubed holes in the bottom, that they would look for schools of fish and fish through the bottom. The tubes or walls had to be higher than the water level outside, or they would sink. So they could only catch a certain weight of fish. Finally, I maybe found a PC on how the Jaredites survived sealed up inside their barges for such a long time. Well, here I am. I've made a little barge down there. And let's pretend that you're inside this huge angel food cake baking pan that's turned face to face. The two halves are sealed together like a dish, as the record says. We're floating, and you're blowing by the wind, and you get fresh water and air through the top hole, but we're getting hungry. So what do? Well, our boat has a hole in the top and bottom. The water is not coming in, and we are floating. So over here to the right, you'll see some interesting things that I bought for this exercise. We have a nice big hole for fishing, bathing, and other things. We have glass covers, perhaps, for the openings that focus the sun for cooking and all the comforts of home. Well, they did say they stoppered up the top, and the bottom, depending upon when it was turned over. Sure. Well, we have these rocks that shine inside. Well, there's an interesting connection that from this slide by it says in the Mayan language something called sastun, which literally means stones of light. Interesting PC. There's the reference there for the stones being lit. Here's an example of the migrations and native tradition. What might be some PCs to my own Choctaw Nation migration story, particularly the migrations northward of 5,400 men, plus their women and children, at the end of the 30th chapter of Alma. The Choctaw used the pointing pole and the migration stories in the book used the devices like the lahona or a person in a cloud. So the book had various other ways of being guided. This is the tradition of the Choctaw. There was two twins, Chicka and Choctaw, that were told they had to migrate. They were told to put a pole in the ground, and that pole each night, then a day, would go in the point to the direction to go. Well, somewhere it says, always in these legends, that said, well, it seemed to be pointing mostly to the north and northeast. At one point, their trip, they have to get water. And so they had to find fresh water. Well, at one point, the pole stopped pointing. They looked for water and the lake was salt. It was a salty lake, but they found a spring around that lake. Now, they stayed there for a while until the pole pointed again. And then, according to the legends that I've been told, some of the Choctaw didn't continue the trip. They kind of stayed around. For a number of presentations as a storyteller and a book and author, I went to Lubbock, Texas. And nearby Lubbock, Texas, this is in the western part of Texas, was a town by the name of Tahoka. Well, in Choctaw, the word generally means bad. Oka generally means water. It is two words, ta and oka. The visiting natives may have been using Choctaw. They may have been saying ta oka, bad water, bad water. And the local people thought it meant fresh water, as you will see in the next slide. I asked if there happened to be a salt lake. And sure enough, there was in near that town. I asked if it happened to be a spring. And the town folks, oh yeah, that's where we get our fresh water for the tower, the water tower. I asked if it happened to have any natives around your town. Oh yes, the Votex teacher in the nearby town is a native. They're supposed to say, O'Donnell, Texas was nearby, so I went there. I found out there was the home of Dan Blocker. You don't know him, or Haas, and Bonanza TV series. So O'Donnell, Texas was where this Votex teacher was. And guess what? We visited with the family, and they are, guess what? Choctaw. And there's the little sign that says on a certain date, so many people got around and voted to petition and select a town site and to be named Tahoka, an Indian word meaning, well, they said fresh water. But if they were Choctaw, it wouldn't have been meaning fresh water. Is the term a great spirit mentioned in the book? Yes, 18 times. How can the distance, it's more mysteries, you see, things that didn't track. How can the distance of the neural neck be 1 day's journey in one place and a day and a half in two different places, in different regions? We won't answer that one today. Are the native traditions of nature speaking, animals speaking, Mother Earth talking to plants, stones crying out? The use of directions in the book, in the Bible. Yes, it is. It's IML means in my library. What does the term voice of the people mean? Well, that's still in my mystery bag. Why would a native tradition bearing weapons as a sign of peace and the teachings of Mother Earth be found in the book? Well, I do have those answered. A real mystery, however, is this last part. I first heard this native teachings from a Zuni elder, and I put it in my mystery bag My twin brother, as my twin brother would say, Rainbow Eagle, I did not believe it until I studied quantum physics. So it's a real mystery. The question really is, where is the account of a person's spirit traveling from place to place and teaching? Where's that found in the book? One of the most interesting and puzzling conversations with medicine men and women is the idea that one can travel in the spirit from place to place. I remember on one occasion, I asked Nancy to take pictures as I was visiting with a spiritual woman on the Pine Ridge reservation, and the pictures, for some reason, did not come out. I, however, could feel her spirit. You don't interrupt, you just listen. Now, this Zuni elder talked of emissaries traveling from place to place, anywhere in the world, and being in two different places by the Spirit. He had something about traveling anywhere by the energy and body. I held it in my mystery bag for years until, yep, I remembered another possible connection called quantum physics. And so the following is taken from some notes I took while I was trying to stay awake during a presentation on quantum physics. And it says, it kind of sounded like native teachings, I said to myself. The fact is, we are all connected through the oneness that is inside of you and me and humans, all humans, and who walk on the planet. We have a direct line to the same force that creates everything from atoms and stars to the DNA of life. There's one small catch. However, our power to do so is dormant until we awaken it. The key to awakening such an awesome power is a small shift in the way we see ourselves in the world. To tap the force, this is quantum physics theory, to tap the force of the universe itself, we must see ourselves as part of the world rather than separate from it. Through the connection that joins all things, the stuff that the universe is made of, the waves and then the particles of energy appear to break the laws of time and space as we once knew them. The freedom of movement, this is really strange, that the quantum particles demonstrate may reveal how the rest of the universe works when we look beyond what we know of physics. Perhaps things are able to travel faster than the speed of sound, speed of light. And maybe they can be in two places at once. And they have this ability. What about us? Well, okay. By now, you have already thought of others who have traveled by the Spirit, mentioned in our scriptures. Let's take the source that I found. I couldn't believe it at the time that I found this in Helaman, but behold, the power of God was with him, and they could not take him and cast him into prison, for he was taken by the Spirit and conveyed out of the midst of them. Now, this is one of the situations where a person was captured, and they wanted to keep him from getting around to teaching. It came to pass that thus he did go forth in the Spirit, from multitude to multitude, declaring the word of God, even until he had declared it unto them all, or sent it forth among all the people. You're supposed to say, Well, this is about the end, but I do want to give you a preview of some of the native teachings. Here we have in Nephi talking about the God of nature suffers. Look at that. Here we talk about in this beautiful slide by Faye, in Mosiah, thou beholdest, I am about to yield up this mortal frame to its what? Mother Earth. A central meaning of Black Elk's dream is very clear. The people in the world shall go through a bad time, a time of wars and troubles, a bad black road, and that they should be awakened, that their hearts be enlightened, that they will work to bring a good time to the whole earth. A time when all men learn to gather power and the goodness from God. So sometime I'd like to share more about Black Elk. We do have prophecies. It shall come after that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Well, briefly then also, I wished I had time to expand upon this. The natives remembered 3 depositories for sacred records near the waters of Lake Superior. Another elder, a gray owl, said, all you nations, search your legends, for they hold the key that can give you back what no man can promise you. Look upon Tula the golden, for in those days the great chief of heaven spoke to us. He sent his beloved, what did it say? The morning star. The healer, to teach us to live and love together. I hope this will come true.
That out west, at a place near where the great mountains stand before you came to the big waters, there was a sacred man among the Paiutes who had talked to the Great Spirit in a vision, and the Great Spirit had told him how to save the Indian peoples and make the Wasishus disappear and bring back all the buffalo and the people who were dead, and how there would be a new earth. Before I came back, the people had got together to talk about this, and they had sent 3 men, Good Thunder, Brave Bear, and Yellow Breast, to see this sacred man with their own eyes and learn if the story about him was true. So these 3 men had made the long journey west, and in the fall after I came home, they returned to the Ogalalas with wonderful things to tell. These 3 men all said the same thing, and they were good men. They saw the Wanikia, who was the son of the Great Spirit, and they talked to him. Washishus called him Jack Wilson, but his name was Wovoka. He told them that there was another world coming, just like a cloud. It would come in a whirlwind out of the west and would crush out everything in this world, which was old and dying. In that other world, there was plenty of meat, just like old times. And in that world, all the dead Indians were alive, and all the buffalo that had ever been killed were roaming around again.
Interesting. Another source about this visitor, when asked how they got their name for the dawn light, they said it was the name of the pale one. They asked his name in childhood when he lived across the ocean. The name he gave them, this is the Algonquin Northeast tribe, the name he gave them was a strange one, hard to say in their liquid language. So today, they'll try hard to say it. Jesus, God of the dawn light. And you're supposed to say, Well, it's time for questions. But before we do that, I want to give you, like the movies give, a preview of what's next. Paul said that I could perhaps have this presentation on the olive tree. Another question while I was teaching botany was, how does Joseph Smith know anything about ancient horticulture of the olive tree? I've always suggested to my classes, just go around Isaiah section and around Jacob's 3rd chapter, because I just don't understand it. I found some sources, and you'll see more. Here's a sampling. Here's one source, and there's the information below. Joseph Smith could have known nothing about olives from personal experience. They do not grow olives. in Vermont and New York. Can it possibly be supposed that Joseph simply guessed right on so many details? Well, we're going to build a kind of a chart. Natives like to have images. And so we're talking about the house of Israel, and then this green arrow is I like arrows, natural branches, the wild olive trees, and so forth. And then there's cuttings and plantings in this parable. All of these I had a question about and didn't understand until I discovered some of these other sources in my horticulture class. So we'll build this chart. Then I found in Paul, this is in King James Version, New Testament, his letter to the Romans not only gives us a timeline for the parable, but it also tells us that Paul was acquainted with the parable, and he knew how to interpret it. That's supposed to have a question mark, I think. But Paul cherished his heritage to the house of Israel. For I am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham and the tribe of Benjamin. Paul identifies the Gentile Romans as the wild olive branch being grafted into the tame tree. That's what this is all about, is the restoring of Israel, the house of it. And if some of the branches were be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree was grafted among them, and they also, if they abide not so, still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God, this is Paul's record, for God is able to graft them in again. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery. Well, that's all they said about the parable. And the people then apparently already knew from their memories of this parable. Well, I want to explore something else with you. I'm going to have you pretend, and now what we're doing is a preview of next time on the pilot. If you follow, now we're talking about the restoring of Israel, and you fall asleep, and you wake up in a new established Israel. Can you pretend? And now you're in this in the new Israel, and the enemy is attacking your borders from every direction. This is the size of Israel compared to the United States and Missouri, to show how small. Well, at this time, they are being attacked. Israel was just formed, and now everybody else is wanting to capture it. And so the record goes, and the references are as follows. The Arab legion of 10,000 is now coming across the east, and their tanks, and their leaders blew up the dam across the Jordan and the swamps of the banks. And the Arabs had the best weapons, and they're now sweeping it. So you are there, knowing that the enemies are attacking. Guess what is in this finding? And then you see millions of honeybees swarming out of their hives and attacking who? The Arabs from end to end. Because previous slides to this, you talk about how Israel will be protected. You see the enemy dropping their weapons as they frantically, don't you like my bees in there? And they run. We pick up their weapons as they run. This was reported in the some American newspapers that carried the front page news with headlines like, "The bees fight for Israel." But then something else happened. The Arab officers came and surrendered. And they said, well, we saw an army of all over these hills, and it looked like a million. So that's one reason why they gave up. But the second reason is intriguing. And this is the Arab officers, and where are those three men with long beards that came and told us to surrender, or we would all be killed. You remember in your experience, our officers are informing them that they knew nothing about this. So what you've done is taken a short journey back. So now's the time for questions. I hope that you have perhaps given some of these questions to Paul, and maybe he then can now take over so that he can help with the questions. Thank you. Looking forward to sharing with you.